How many times are you cooking and a recipe calls for cream and you don't have cream, or I kind of quit buying cream because the prices are so high. So I'm going to teach you how to make cream substitute, basically, that you can use. I have not tried this as a coffee creamer yet, but guess what? That's what I'm making it for, because my wife asked me if I'd make it for her for the coffee. So first of all, we're going to start. This is very simple, but I've got a long story to tell you, so you're going to sit here while I mix it up. But 2 cups of milk is what we're going to start with. All right. Then I've got 2 tablespoons of butter. It's going in. And then we're going to do 1 tablespoon of sugar. And you can use a little less sugar if you need to. I'm going to put those things away and come back and we'll start. So you definitely, on this one, you want to keep stirring because you don't want this to scorch or burn, unlike what I do with the yogurt where it kind of scorches to the bottom. This one you want to keep it clear. All you want to do is you're going to get it where it's thick. And then once you get it to where it's a thick consistency, we're going to let it cool down, run it through a blender, and it's ready. All right, I want to talk about 2 of my favorite directors. And one of them was a director, an actor, and a stuntman. And unfortunately for Van, he actually lived right here nearby us. And he was one of my best friends. And so his name was Chuck Bell. He started out as a stuntman and did some acting. He always said he was never a good actor, which I must agree with him. But a great director, especially stunt director. He usually did the second director, and his partner was Richard Rush. Now you have to understand something, okay? These guys got started back in, I guess, the 60s, and a lot of the movies that Richard Rush did, I mean, well, for instance, one of them is called The Stuntman. They are still using that movie today in the film school in Los Angeles to teach, because it's a movie about a movie within a movie. You'll understand if you ever see it. Now, unfortunately, back then, I think, especially even when we got to the 80s and stuff, a lot of our movies had a lot of filthy scenes in them and stuff like that. These guys were not Christians. But quite a few people pretty much got their start through them. You know, what my favorite actor that got started through them was Jack Nicholson. Also, trying to think of the guy's name. He used to do this Seagram commercial. Seagram's golden white coolers. Was it Bruce something? All right, I'll think of it in a minute. But the lady that played Margaret Houlihan got her, you know, on MASH, got her start through them. There were so many actors and actresses that got started through these guys. And my favorite story from Chuck is they're filming a movie that was called Freebie and the Bean. And it was basically, nowadays they'd say, oh, that's discriminatory or whatever. But back then, they didn't care. But Freebie and the Bean was about this cop, and they called him Freebie because he basically tried to bribe to get everything free. And Bean was his partner who was Mexican, and so he was always calling him Beaner. So that's why it was called Freebie and the Bean. But there's this scene in there, and you know, Chuck plays a part in there, and like I said, he wasn't a very good actor, but you know, he did all the stunt scenes and everything else. And there's a scene where huge truck flips over that's just full of chickens. It's carrying chickens and bust all over the place. And these chickens are just running everywhere, and a bunch of them died and blah, blah, blah. Well, here comes PETA. And PETA is just having a fit. And, you know, they want to shut them down because of, you know, what they just filmed and blah, blah, blah. And Chuck says, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You're talking about that scene we did a little bit back? Yes, you know, he says, you have to understand something. Those are stunt chickens. And they're like, what? Those are stunt chickens. And anyway, they said, okay, and they left. And I always wanted to record him saying that, because you know what, I miss Chuck, and I'm sorry to say for Van, you know, my daughter was she was in a play here, you know, in the high school, and Chuck was going to come. And then what happened was, he wasn't feeling very good. Turns out it was his gallbladder. And this is all right when COVID was starting at the same time. So he goes down to Athens, the hospital in Athens, ETMC or whatever, and they operate on him. They do a laparoscopic gallbladder on him and stuff, and so he did this on Friday. On Monday, I go in, you know, I go over to see Chuck, and I'm like, Chuck, you need to go back to the hospital now. And he's like, oh, the pain will go away. And you have to understand, Steve McQueen was his best friend. He did all these movies with the Duke, with, I keep going to say his real name, Morrison, whatever, but John Wayne. He did all these movies with John Wayne. So he was one of these tough guys, and he's like, oh, that pain will go away. And I'm saying, Chuck, I'm sorry, you know, it's not the pain. You know, I can tell something's wrong. I knew he had internal bleeding, you know, and I tried to convince him, and you know, he wouldn't do it. So about 8 days later, I get a phone call from his housekeeper. And she says, well, I've got an appointment in 2 days for him, but you're going to have to help me take him, you know? And I'm like, well, what's going on? She said, I can't even get him out of bed. And I'm like, oh no, you know? And so I got there early. I went in there. Sure enough, I mean, he couldn't even move. I picked him up, and Chuck was probably about 2 feet taller than me, carried him out to the car. He had already lost a ton of weight, and I put him in the car. I start driving. I mean, I'm speeding, heading down there. I get to the office, and, you know, one of his nurses tells me, well, his appointment's not for 2 hours. And I said, ma'am, you got about 5 minutes, and it's over. And so out walks the doctor. The doctor sees him and basically says, get him to the emergency room now. Get him to the emergency room now. He knew, you know, he knew it was internal bleeding. So we get over there, and of course, you know, this is the middle of COVID stuff. So they say he's got COVID, you know, which he didn't have no COVID. He was dying of internal bleeding. He gets him in the ICU, and you know, he would come out of it and go into it and blah, blah, blah. Matter of fact, I took a picture of his horses and his dog, you know, and this friend of mine that's a doctor down there says he showed him the pictures, and he says, that's not my dog. He says, yeah, it's your dog. Todd's just a terrible photographer, you know. And so, but long story short, ICU told me we tried to get him out of here, get him where he could be operated on, but we just couldn't get him back enough to do it. And so he died. And then, of course, Hollywood Reporter came out and said he died of COVID. And I wrote them a little letter and said, you know, first of all, they had said he died in Tyler. I don't know if they ever recanted that or not, but he didn't die in Tyler. He died in Athens. And but they did recant the COVID part because that wasn't true, you know. And now it says he died of internal bleeding. And the last thing I read, but you know, I really wanted to do a movie with both these guys, and never did get the chance. So hopefully, you know, when I regain my eyesight, I will go back into acting. But as of right now, you know, I am just enjoying what I'm doing. I'm going to try to do as many shows as I can on helping people save money, because, you know, when you go from making a lot of money to basically making nothing, and you got the, you know, 2 kids in college and everything else, you got to start learning how to save some money. So that's what we've been working on. And actually, you know, I've always been a chef, and I opened restaurants when I was a kid, and opened spaghettis in Van. But anyway, I'll keep stirring this without you, and then I'll come back and show you kind of the end result. Okay, so it was not thickening up. So I ended up getting the rest of that half cup of butter. And we're going to slowly, I melted in the microwave, we're going to slowly start drizzling in, because it wasn't doing enough fat. And I said you have to have 30% fat. So I'm just going to whisk it in here, and then I'm going to let it sit. And hopefully I didn't mess up the first butter and have it separating. And then after that, when it's cool, we are going to put it through a blender. So basically it ended up being half a cup of butter melted down, and then the 2 cups of milk and 1 tablespoon of sugar. All right. So now as I start letting it cool, it should solidify. So I'll be back. Okay, so basically all right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mixture, and I don't know if you can see this, but all the butter floated to the top, you know. So now we're going to emulsify it. Now I tell you what, I am going to probably end up doing another recipe on this, because I didn't like the way this one worked, and I ended up having to add more butter. I found some others that I like better. Also, you know, I could probably make it out of the powder milk, but I don't think it would work with the powder milk that you get from a food pantry, because that's instant and it's skim, and you need 37% fat. So what I'm going to do is turn it on and emulsify it for 4 minutes, and we'll see how it comes out. All right? Okay, there it goes. Let's shut that off. And so that was 4 minutes. Then let's pour this out and see what we think. This is our, now it's still a little lumpy. You know, it's not coming out as smooth as I'd like. But I will do another recipe for this. But truthfully, you could do that with all your others, but I think the other recipe will allow us to be able to whip it better and make the different things we want to make with it. But thank you for watching.